Have you ever sat in a quiet room and wondered if the silence you gave was finally being heard? You spent years speaking, explaining, forgiving. You gave advice, you gave support, and most of all, you gave love. Unconditional, unwavering love. And yet, there came a point when your voice seemed to bounce off the walls, unheard. Maybe your calls went unanswered. Maybe your texts were left on read. Maybe they walked out of your life thinking you'd chase after them again like always. But this time, you didn't. And that silence, it wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about playing games. It was a choice. A powerful one. One that finally said, I deserve peace too. Today, I want to talk to you about what happens when you stop explaining yourself. When you stop pleading, fixing, and hoping, and you simply go quiet. Because silence, as hard as it is to hold, can speak louder than any words you've ever said. You may not see it on the surface, but your silence creates a ripple effect. It doesn't just fall into empty space. It lands in their hearts, their minds, their conscience, and it sets off a journey they didn't expect. Let's take a walk through that journey together. These are the 5 stages your adult children go through when you go silent. You may not witness all of them, you may not hear the confessions, but I promise you, if you're holding your silence with strength and self-respect, these stages are unfolding behind the curtain. Let's start with the first one. At first, they feel relief. Yes, relief. It may hurt to hear that. After everything you've done, after the tears you've shed, and the sacrifices you've made, it might seem cruel that your silence brings them peace. But in the beginning, that's exactly what it does. Because silence to them feels like space. It feels like they're finally free from the conversations they didn't want to have. Free from the mirror you held up to their choices. Free from the weight of guilt they didn't want to carry. They tell themselves, maybe mom's finally over it. Maybe dad just needs time. They brush it off as a phase. They assume you're giving them the quiet treatment because you want something, or that you're too emotional to talk. They feel in control because you're the one who's gone quiet, not them. But that sense of control is just the calm before the storm. Because silence, my friend, isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the realization. And that takes us to stage 2, curiosity. It starts as a whisper, a little wondering, a quiet tug at the back of their mind. They check their phone more often. They peek at your social media. They notice the absence. Where are the usual texts? Where are the check-ins, the just thinking of you messages? Where are the little gestures you always made that they never seem to acknowledge? The quiet becomes too loud to ignore. It unsettles them because they don't know what it means. It's unfamiliar. It's not the version of you they were used to. And when people can't predict you, they can't control you. They'll start trying to read between the lines. They'll replay old messages. They'll revisit memories. Some fond, some painful. They'll search for signs that you're still there, waiting in the background like before. But you're not waiting anymore. You're healing. You're living. You're learning that silence isn't loneliness. It's power. It's protection. It's peace. And if they've grown used to taking your love for granted, this curiosity begins to chip away at their comfort. Because silence doesn't tell them what they want to hear. It doesn't offer reassurance or invitation, it offers mystery. And that mystery begins to stir something deeper, something they didn't expect. Now, before we move on, let me pause right here and speak to your heart. I know silence isn't easy, especially when it comes to your children, the ones you carried, the ones you raised, the ones you would have moved mountains for. Holding your silence doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you've started loving yourself. And I want you to hear this clearly. Silence is not the absence of care. It's the presence of boundaries. It's the voice of wisdom saying, I'm done begging to be treated. With kindness I should have been given freely. It's okay if they don't understand that yet. It's okay if it takes time. Because this journey, my friend, is just beginning. And your silence is guiding them in a way your words never could. They felt relief at first. Now they're curious. What comes next may surprise them, and maybe surprise you too. Curiosity doesn't sit still for long. It grows legs. It starts walking in circles. It starts poking and prodding, wondering why the silence hasn't broken yet. And from that restless wondering, we enter the third stage, discomfort and challenge. Now, this is where things shift. The silence that once gave them peace now feels like tension. They can't quite put their finger on it, but it lingers. It follows them through the day. It creeps in at night. It hums in the background, like a song they can't turn off. They might not even admit it out loud, but your silence is beginning to challenge them. It's making them question not just your behavior, but their own. It's making them look inward, and that's not something most people like to do. It's uncomfortable to face, the reflection in the mirror, when the noise of daily life no longer shields you from yourself. So what do? They test you. They post something online they know will catch your attention. They bring up your name in conversations with mutual friends. Maybe they send a short message. Hey, you okay? Just enough to check if you're still there, still within reach. Some might even try to provoke you. Not because they're cruel, but because discomfort pushes people to reach for familiarity, even if it's unhealthy. They'd rather get a reaction from you, even an angry one, than feel the emptiness of being ignored. They want confirmation that you're still emotionally invested, that your silence is just temporary, that deep down, you're still hurting, still waiting, still needing them. But when you don't respond the way they expect, when you don't react, when you don't bite the bait, they begin to feel something they didn't expect. Powerless. This is a moment you may never see. It happens behind the scenes, often hidden beneath pride or performance. They might act unaffected. They might post pictures of happiness or busy lives. But that's often a mask worn to cover a crack that's growing wider each day you remain still, centered, and silent. And this crack, this fracture in their emotional wall, is what leads us into stage 4. Fear. Fear doesn't always announce itself with panic. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits quietly in the pit of the stomach. And for your child, the one who thought you'd always be there, fear sounds like this. What if they're really done with me? What if I push too far? What if someone else is taking the place I never thought I'd lose? This fear grows because silence doesn't provide answers. It only asks questions. And the human mind, when left unanswered, often writes the darkest stories. They start imagining what your life looks like without them. They picture you laughing again, smiling again, healing, thriving. They think about the way your presence used to feel, and they start realizing how much they miss it now that it's gone. And this fear is not just about losing contact. It's about losing a source of unconditional love, security, and identity. For many of you watching this, I know you've been more than just a parent. You've been a caretaker, a supporter, a quiet hero in the background, always picking up the pieces when things fall apart. And when that presence disappears, it shakes the ground more than they ever imagined it could. At this point, they're no longer checking your social media just out of curiosity. They're looking for evidence, any small sign that they still matter to you, that there's still a doorway open, that your silence is a pause, not a goodbye. But you've come too far to turn back now, not because you don't care, but because you finally do about yourself. This fear they feel, it's not your responsibility to soothe. It's not your job to fix. You've done that for long enough. Fear has a way of forcing people to confront the truth. And the truth is, if your presence was never appreciated, Your absence becomes your loudest teacher. And maybe, just maybe, they're beginning to understand that. If you're sitting here, watching this, and wondering if they're starting to feel your silence, believe me, they are. They may not say it, they may never admit it, but fear leaves fingerprints on the heart. It changes how they think, how they remember, how they begin to see you, not as someone who can be taken for granted, but as someone whose absence carries weight. And I want to speak directly to you again, for just a moment. This stage is hard, because you might start feeling guilty. You might question yourself. Am I being too harsh? Should I reach out just to check in? But I want to remind you of something. Holding your silence doesn't mean closing your heart. It means guarding it. It means saying, I will not keep bleeding so someone else can stay comfortable. It means trusting that your silence isn't meant to hurt them. It's meant to heal you. And in that healing, you are modeling strength. You are showing that love does not mean accepting mistreatment. You are showing that being a parent does not mean being a doormat. You are showing that boundaries are not walls. They are doors you close gently, not to punish, but to protect your peace. And peace, my dear friend, is not something you owe anyone. It is something you owe yourself. So let the discomfort come. Let the fear rise. Let them wrestle with what your silence means. Because you have spent enough time explaining, defending, and sacrificing. Now, it's their turn to listen. And they can only hear you in the quiet. Regret never arrives with fanfare. It slips in quietly, often long after the damage has been done, when they least expect it. At first, they may not even recognize it for what it is. It might feel like a late-night ache they can't explain. A memory that plays on loop. A sudden tightness in their chest. When they see something, that reminds them of you. It's subtle, until it's not. Stage 5 is regret, and it is, without a doubt, the heaviest stage of all. By now, your silence has shifted the landscape. You are no longer the same version of yourself that cried, pleaded, or waited. You've been rebuilding quietly. You've poured love back into yourself. And every day you chose to stay silent, you gave yourself the gift of clarity. But they're only just beginning to see what's been lost. They remember how you used to show up. Every birthday, every milestone, every moment of chaos. They recall the sound of your voice on the other end of the phone, the way you always seemed to know when something was wrong. They replay those little moments you thought they didn't notice at the time, the check-ins, the meals, the sacrifices. And now, they miss it. Not the idea of you. You. They realize the warmth you offered wasn't just background noise. It was the anchor, the thing they thought would always be there. And that's when regret begins to speak. Not loudly, not publicly. But in the quiet moments, when they're alone with their thoughts, they wonder if they pushed too hard, if they ignored too much, if they confused your kindness with weakness, if they assumed you'd keep forgiving forever, and are only now realizing that forever has an end. They might reach out, eventually. Maybe with a simple message, maybe a long letter. Maybe they won't reach out at all. But make no mistake, your silence has already spoken. You see, regret isn't always about wanting someone back. Often, it's about wishing you had treated them better when they were still within reach. And when it comes to a parent's love, especially a love that was steady, patient, and undeserved for far too long, that regret cuts deep. Some may try to hide it. They'll put on a show of strength, pretend they've moved on. But deep down, they'll remember the day the phone stopped ringing, the day the texts went unanswered, the day your voice, the one they never appreciated, disappeared from their life. And you'll be standing in a different place now. Not bitter, not angry, just whole. Because silence, when held with dignity, has a way of transforming grief into growth. It allows you to mourn the fantasy of the relationship you hoped for while making room for the peace you actually deserve. And that, my friend, is where your power truly lies. Not in how they feel about you, but in how you feel about yourself. You're not cold. You're not heartless. You're not giving up on love. You're giving up on begging for love from people who don't know how to receive it. You're not turning your back. You're turning toward a version of yourself that you may have lost for a while. The one who feels safe, grounded, and free. This is what it means to choose yourself. To say, I still love you, but I won't abandon myself to prove it. To say, I forgive you, but I'm moving forward without you. To say, I am no longer responsible for your growth. That is yours to carry. You may never hear the words, I'm sorry. You may never get the apology you deserve. But silence doesn't need their permission to heal. It only needs your commitment to peace. And if you've made it this far in the journey, if you've chosen to remain silent not to wound, but to restore, then let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. You are brave, you are wise, and you are not alone. Thousands, maybe millions, of older parents are walking this same path right now, reclaiming their worth, letting go of old roles, finding new strength in quiet spaces. I want you to know that this silence you're holding, it isn't empty. It's full of lessons, full of dignity, full of hope. And yes, it is being felt, even if they never say it. You're teaching them something they may not have learned anywhere else. That love without respect is not sustainable. That silence can speak truth. And that sometimes the most powerful way to say I matter is to say nothing at all. So as we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you with a few gentle reminders. You are not too old to grow. You are not too late to heal. And you are not too quiet to be heard. If you've ever questioned whether your silence is making a difference, trust that it is. Not just in their hearts, but in yours. And if this video resonated with you, I invite you to share your story in the comments. You don't have to go into detail. Just let us know you're here, that you're walking this journey too. And if you're looking for more encouragement, more strength, and more moments of truth like this, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We're building a community where silence is no longer shameful, it's sacred. Where healing isn't rushed, and every story matters. So here's to you, to your quiet power, to the version of yourself that's blooming in the stillness, and to the life you're building. Not in spite of the silence, but because of it. You are not broken, you are becoming. And that, my friend, is something no one can take away.